In the last 48 hours, I have learned something very important. My opinions are subject to doubt, criticism, and confusion when I decide to upload them to the internet. Seems like something I should have learned a long time ago, but here we are. For brief context, I uploaded a video on November 4th talking about Gamefreak as a company and how I disagreed with the community's opinion towards them. I defended Gamefreak and made the poor decision to defend them with opinions that were both misunderstood and honestly just plain wrong in some cases. Today, I intend on elaborating those points which I still believe to be true, and I plan on discussing and likely accepting those who showed me a more accurate way of thinking. For starters, I said that 212 employees is not a lot of people. For Pokemon is what I meant. People quoted games like Subnautica, which I love, by the way, and have always wanted to make a video on. They quoted Outer Wilds, which I have not played, but I know is very beloved. And I think this guy meant to say Palworld, because I couldn't find any studio that went by this name, stating that all those games had much smaller teams than 212 people. And despite that, they made fantastic games that are large in scope, high in quality, and pretty well loved by their communities. Now let me be clear. I think that you have a valid point that a smaller team can make fantastic games. Not to mention the solo devs this year who have made indie games like, Balatro, which I also fucking love. I think Among Us was one guy, and then Lethal Company was one guy as well, or maybe a couple people. So I know that a smaller team can make great games. But I have to ask you, how many games have those developers made since then, and how many have they made before then? My main defenses are this. I still think 212 people is a drastically smaller team than Pokemon deserves, for the scope of the games that the community wants, and under the time constraints that they're forced on. They need a bigger team to achieve bigger goals at a faster pace. That's honestly as simple as I can make it, and it makes sense to me, but if you still think I'm wrong, then let me know, correct me. B, that team of 212 people isn't even really allowed to be a team when creating games, meaning that since they're making so many games, there is likely never a time when the entire Gamefreak company is able to be working on the same thing at once. For example, let's say you have 212 people total. You've got a large portion working on Scarlet and Violet. You've likely got the next biggest portion either working on Legends EA, or they're dedicated to doing the DLC for Scarlet Violet. Teams beyond that are doing, the remainder of those options. And then there's smaller teams that are conceptualizing the future games like Generation 10, and then there's probably a team of like 4 dudes that's doing bug fixes and patchwork on stuff that's already released. Are they also making a new engine for the Switch 2 games, which I am only reading about from the comments and my friends' opinions. I didn't know about that, but if they're making a new engine, then that's exciting for the future. Obviously, I'm probably wrong about the specific projects the teams are working on. I'm probably wrong about how many people and how long each team does and how long they all have, but my point is, they are fractured up throughout the development time, and therefore, even though that number 212 seems larger than these other games, I still don't even think that 212 is an accurate count of who got to make Legends EA and, who was actually on the project for the 3 years that people say they had to make it. I don't think that that is accurate. The next thing that people really disagreed with was my take on the money situation and who's calling the shots at Gamefreak. I said that they're making about 18 to 20% of the yearly revenue, which is billions of dollars. And so people have said that obviously 20% of billions is still a ton of money. And listen, I agree with you, but I think that missed my point entirely. What I meant was the games that Gamefreak develops make up a portion of the entire Pokemon revenue. I did not mean that Gamefreak itself earns 20% of billions of dollars, and I still do not think that's the case, because as was explained to me so many times, Gamefreak is part of a 3-way joint company that is the Pokemon Company. I did already say this, though I said it incorrectly when I said they're told what to do by the other half. Now to make this point, I must refer you to a video created by Moon Channel that I watched many months ago. From what I understand, he's a genuine lawyer who makes videos discussing video game related stuff, and in this video he broke down who truly owns the Pokemon Company. From the video, I had the takeaway that while it's technically 3 companies that own Pokemon as a whole, being Nintendo, Creatures Inc., and Gamefreak, Nintendo actually kinda just owns Creatures Inc. as well, or at least they largely control the people within Creatures Inc. So by that logic, Gamefreak is up against the 66% majority of the Pokemon Company as a whole, and so they must follow the directions of the larger portion of the company. It is a shame that this is the case, and it's honestly just kind of depressing that businesses and companies are allowed to function this way. And from what I understand from Moon Channel's video, Gamefreak has very little say in what they get to do. This might be a big reason that led to my frustrations initially with the Pokemon community in the first place. I didn't think that people were aware of this situation and how small of a voice Gamefreak has within the franchise. I'm sure that Gamefreak genuinely does make a lot of money, But from my perspective, they are instructed how to conduct business. They are instructed on exactly how and when to make their games, despite how long the games may actually need to be realized. And they are instructed on how many people get to even make those games. This has always been the case, but in the days of the 2D games, Gamefreak managed to mostly stay above water. This is what I meant when I said that once we went 3D, the technology far outpaced them. They were, and still are, unable to perform very well under all these constraints, and I personally view that as a fucking shame on the Pokemon Company. Nintendo has no incentive to increase either the resources or the timelines for Game Freak either, because like we've already established, Game Freak is just raking in so much cash for Nintendo, and again, Nintendo sees that as an absolute win. This brings me to one of the points where I feel like I genuinely failed in my original video, and that's game quality and money. The cost of the games, the cost of the Switch itself, and the fact that those costs are increasing while the games are just flatlining or straight up declining. This relates pretty heavily with my previous point, meaning that I believe many of the decisions regarding, price and the speed of the releases, which hurts the quality, kind of all come down to Nintendo itself. To restate the point of that last video, I do not think we should hate Game Freak itself, and some of the comments even acknowledge that. I think it's completely fine and justified to despise Nintendo's practices, and I myself am not really a fan of these financial decisions that the games industry as a whole is making. But my focus in that video, and this one, is solely that the developers at Game Freak are doing what they can to deliver these games to appease both Nintendo and to appease the fans as much as they can manage under all this context. However, I failed to really address the point at all. I just mentioned how I straight up bought a Switch 2 along with paying full price for a brand new copy of the game. I did mention how I was in a lucky position to be able to do that, but I mentioned it too briefly, and honestly, I didn't really expand on that aspect whatsoever, making it seem like I didn't care that things were expensive. Reading the comments and talking with my best friend, I have realized that I made a critical error and that I have really lost touch with a struggle that lots of people are facing in this hobby we all love. In my case, I am not wealthy, but I really do work a ton of hours in my day job, and I am paid a fair wage for my work, so if I put extra time in, I'm able to make big purchases like this every now and again. I thought I recognized that I'm lucky to be in a position like this, but in reading the comments, I realized that my perspective was shockingly incorrect. I apologize for that. This guy mentioned that it's a late-stage capitalism thing where we all know the villains of this story, and there really isn't much we can do to change this, especially when we just hand over fists of cash to Nintendo and their products, which is objectively what I did, and I didn't realize how disconnected I had been from this reality, and for that I am truly sorry. I apologize. This person said that I could have acquired my copy used or secondhand, and as dumb as it may sound, that thought genuinely did not even cross my mind. But I swear to you, I will do my best to make these decisions differently in the future, because I am very emotionally tied to this series, as some people pointed out, and so I will likely want to keep buying their games, despite the community's perception and despite these videos here. But I can at least try buying them in a way that does not give Nintendo a single cent, and I promise I will do my best to achieve that goal. I never intended to disrespect that financial struggle, and I'd like to think I'm the type of person who will dwell on this mistake for at least a decade, which should hopefully prevent me from making it again. I'm gonna keep yapping, but that's my main portion of defense and acceptance for the responses to that video. People told me which games they started the series with and how over time they've watched the state of Pokemon just decline further and further. And believe it or not, I started loving this franchise back in the days of Fire Red and Leaf Green. I'd watch my older brother as he played through Leaf Green on a DS Lite that he had way back when we were kids. I would literally sit next to him whenever he wanted to play, and I would be absolutely glued to the screen. I'd probably pissed him off with how much I begged him to either play it myself or just to watch him play it. Sometimes he would be on a tiny mattress playing it, and I would sit on his back just to peer over his shoulder or to listen to the music and the sounds of the attacks. I thought it was the coolest thing in the fucking world back then, and I begged for years to be able to play it myself. I didn't get my own game until my dad came to visit one summer, and since I had done pretty well at school that year, he bought me my own DS. And later that year for Christmas, my mom got me Pokemon Heart Gold with the little Poketch pedometer thing. It was my very first Pokemon game that I got to play in my entire life, and I adored that game. It was an absolute dream come true. To get a little personal, my life was kind of in turmoil at that age. My parents were split up since I was in preschool, and every year we were moving houses and schools so often that I would just turn to Heart Gold because it was such a comfortable place and a safe place to be. I remember the Elite Four battles when I would be rocking back and forth on my pillow while I selected my best fire-type move to try and beat that damn Toxicroak. I had chosen Cyndaquil as my starter, and my Typhlosion was like level 80, while the rest of my team I had abandoned in the 40s because I was a dumb kid and I loved my starter. All four of his moves were straight fire types. If that man failed me in a battle, I would genuinely be in shambles. Somehow I actually did beat the Elite Four. I think I used legendaries like Ho-Oh and Lugia. But I was completely blown away by the fact that I could explore all of Kanto right after, the region I had so lovingly watched my brother play through the entirety of. It was truly one of the greatest and first gaming experiences of my lifetime. I went on to play Pokemon White, which I also loved, but I didn't get a 3DS until Sun and Moon had long released, and so somehow I acquired a secondhand copy of Pokemon X since it was an older game at that point. Fast forward to 2019 when Sword and Shield were coming out. By that time I had a job, and so I worked really hard to buy a Switch Lite so I could play the new games. I couldn't even afford it even with the overtime, and so my best friend's older brother bought it for me, and I made payments to him until I paid it off. I played through Pokemon Sword, and then over the years I bought and played the DLC, and then Shining Pearl, which was genuinely a tragic game, I will not lie. And then I got Arceus, which I fell completely in love with. And then Scarlet and Violet, which even though I hated the quality and performance of those games, I still paid full price for them along with the DLC. And now we arrive at ZA. And you know what? I am absolutely part of the problem. I am so emotionally tied to these games and this franchise that yes, I will buy the games even if they kinda suck, or even when they really suck. In the position that I'm in now, it is not such a challenge to afford to do so, but I can now see and acknowledge that I should have and will now start to at least spend my money in a way that doesn't let Nintendo receive it. You know, by buying secondhand or just used copies or whatever I can do that doesn't directly pay them. I can see that now. People have told me that I'm naive, or that I'm just too positive, or that I'm hoping for change that will likely never come. I'm being positive even though every available indicator says that the gaming industry will continue to march on with these new patterns and new decisions. I know that when Bethesda finally releases Fallout 5 in another fucking decade, it's probably not going to be very good. I know that when Call of Duty Black Ops 7, 8, or 9 come out, they'll probably still be pretty shitty, just like the same shit we're seeing today. And I know that Generation 10 of the Pokemon franchise has a very high chance of coming out undercooked, underdeveloped, and overpriced. But Jesus, man, maybe it makes me a moron, but I just don't see the point in giving in to all the nihilism. Gaming to me is a way to escape my anxieties. It's a way for me to get immersed with characters and worlds that I love. Pokemon check all of those boxes. And that flame in me is still bright. Even if I can see and agree that the industry is failing right now, I simply do not accept that all hope is lost. But all that being said, that is the Late Night Crunch. Love it or hate it, that's how I feel. And I will see you all next time. See ya.